Hello, today I'm going through how I made a battery name tool to help when working with Unreal. What we're going to be making today will look a lot like this when we're done, where we have a set of controls for renaming objects. For example, we can select all these and decide that we're going to rename all the chairs to floor. And if we do preview actors, chair becomes floor, etc. Or perhaps we can do something else where we say that, we want to take the existing name and all we want to do is we want to rename it static mesh, and we want to have the index, and we want that to use 3 digits. Preview actors again, and so now all these, no matter what their names were, become static mesh 0 through 5. Run that. Could do the same thing for assets that are selected in the content browser. And there's a couple of other controls like back to front, case sensitivity, etc. So let's just get started. The first thing we do is we create an editor utility for the editor utility widget. When you create an editor utility widget, you can run it. It just opens up a dockable tab. This can be dropped anywhere else in the world there. So when we open the editor, what we are greeted with is a view here. We're not going to be using any animations or the timeline, so we really only want the compiler result. And that we can even just, drag down to give ourselves some more space here. But what we're going to first do in this first video is make the basic layout for the work we're doing here. So the structure for this one is that we're going to do what we saw before, right? There's 2 panels. So there's one side which has some of the information, the data that we're using, and on the right side there is a scroll box which will contain all of the elements that are being renamed. Below the data pad there will be some buttons, and we might put some tutorial or some documentation in there with the extra space. So to do this, the first thing that we need is we need to convert this thing into a border. So if we type in border here, select that, we can do replace with border. Now this is a border element instead of a canvas element. We're gonna set its brush color to 0, to invisible though. Now then we can kind of work with this as a single item. So we're gonna do a horizontal box. This is going to give us the 2 different columns. So that inside of that horizontal box, we'll put the first column in, which is our vertical box. So now that's sitting here on the side. And we're going to go ahead and add the scroll box, which is the second column here. And for the scroll box, we're going to set that to fill. So that's going to fill up all the available space. This is going to fill up only the space that it needs since it's set to auto. Here, the first thing, the top item of this vertical box will be a details view, which you'll see immediately is marked here as undefined object. So that's something that we're going to have to fix in a moment. And then we're going to just I'm going to stub in all the buttons below this. So we're going to add a border here. This is going to become just an outline border for that box. So let's go ahead and set this tint to something kind of translucent or something less strong. We're going to have it draw as a border, and we're going to set the margin for all of these to 1. So now it draws a border. You can kind of barely see it there all the way around it. And then inside of that border, we're going to set up a few buttons. So we're going to do a button here. We're going to have 3 buttons in all. But first I'm going to style this one. So I'm just going to give this one a background color where it will be a value of, say, 0.175 arbitrarily. And then we're just going to duplicate that 3 times. Oh, but we can't because it is not in something that can be duplicated. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to wrap that in a vertical box. Then we're going to duplicate it 3 times. Then these top 2 buttons we're actually going to wrap with a horizontal box. So they go left to right. We're going to set both of these to fill, so they fill all the available space. And we're going to set up a text in here as well for all 3 of these. So text, 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 These are going to become our 3 different buttons, so we're just going to go ahead and set up the naming. So this is preview actor. When we click this button, we're going to see what the rename would do to all of the actors that are selected. We're going to do preview assets for there, and then here at the bottom, we're going to do a confirm rename. So when we click this button, it's going to rename them. Now all these are gigantic text because by default the text here is set to 24 point. We're going to set that down to 10 point. I'm actually going to make these regular as well and set their transform policy to upper, which makes them all uppercase. And then in the confirm rename, I'm going to set that one to bold since that one's a little bit different and more of a active, like an action that will take over. So now that that is set up, that gives us this side, but again, we have this undefined object, and this undefined object is something that we're going to need to work on. So here, back in the graph, we're going to look at the pre-construct. Pre-construct happens even when it runs in the editor, and this happens even during design time. So when we've got something in here, it's going to happen to this view as well in the designer view, which is important to us. Real quickly, just to set this, I'm going to make this like go custom, and I'm just going to scale it up so that it doesn't keep resetting the size on me to something that that's too big. Anyway, back in the graph. So this details view is going to control our parameters. So we're going to grab that off, do a get here. Details views are really powerful. They can show basically the entire details view that you would see in the world outliner. You can see that these actually happen here, here in any widget that you've created. And there's some limitations and it doesn't work with every single actor, but for most objects, it's a great way to control, to set up and to view really, native looking controls. So here to make this work though, we have to set the object. So we're gonna do set object, and we're gonna set, get a reference to self. Plug those in and plug those in during pre-construct. This will happen both at runtime and here in design view. So you can see that there's a bunch of details here, but this is actually way more than we need. We don't want any of this stuff. This is controlling the actual widget itself. These are the details for the widget. So we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to set up the variables that we need. And so we're going to go ahead and just set up the basics and pre-set up all the things that we're going to need. So we need a find pattern. And we're going to set this category to parameters. Now, if we compile and we go over here and we click on this, we can add a categories to show. So the categories to show will only show properties that have this category. And since we set the categories to parameters, now we should only see find pattern. So find pattern is the only one that we see there, which is great for us. So then what that means is that we can go to the graph here, and we can go back to these parameters and we can make a bunch more of these. So I'm going to make a replace pattern. This is what we'll replace our value with. I'm going to set up a few more, which like a Boolean. We'll make this one be replace from right here. We're going to duplicate another one. We're going to do case sensitive. And we'll do one more, which is we'll get to later, which is allow wildcards. This one we're going to set to true. Case sensitive we'll set to keep false. And we'll keep replace from right false. We need to move all of these into our parameters. Oh, and we need one more, which is actually the count. And this is a number here, which is how many by default, or how many times will the find pattern be replaced by the replace pattern. So we're going to put that up there at the top there. We're going to keep all of those the same, and we go back to the designer. We now have a nice little layout. Because this wildcards will be something that we don't think people will want to mess with very often, I'm going to show you that you can, underneath the advanced properties in your variable here, you can click this advanced properties. There's advanced display. And what that does is that makes this value now set up in the advanced properties. So the user will be able to click this to get to that allow wildcards show flag if they know it's there and if that's something that they think that they want to mess with. Now we've got this side, we need to go to the next side, to the left, to the right side. And in the right side, what we want here is inside the scroll box, we're going to want all of the selected actors after you click preview to be showed up here with a few controls. You know, we want to see what the old name of it was. We want to see what the new name of it was and allow you to put in a new name of your own. We also want a checkbox just to disable that item so that very quickly you can say, you know what, actually don't rename this one, or do rename it, and have that set up. So what we need here is we need a dynamic entry box. And a dynamic entry box is the simplest way to get items that are created on demand, but we don't actually have a widget class here that we want to use yet. So we need to make one. So also I realized I didn't rename this. But let's create a new one, and this one's going to be the same thing. It's going to be an editor utility widget, and we're going to call it batch rename, and we'll call it list item, because that's what this is. This is an element in that list that is going to be modified. So we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to, you know, make this be something pretty simple. We're going to go to border, do replace with border. Again, we're going to go ahead and in this case, I'm actually going to give it a little bit of a color. I'm going to go black, but I'm going to make it very faint. And then in here, we're actually going to use a grid panel. So grid panels are interesting because they set up columns, which could be very useful if you're going to do, you know, you could just use a horizontal panel here, but grids are nice because you can set up different settings for how much space each section should take up relative to how fill it is. If you set 0, it'll just take up the minimal amount of space that item needs to render without clipping. If you put any percentage in here, it'll be saying this is the weighting, the percentage of that I want of this box. I kind of added them all together. So this is really saying I want 0.5 out of 1.5. You could also put in 0.333 here and put in 0.666 here. It's kind of the same deal because that adds up to the same percentages. So then we're going to just start and we're going to add again another border here. This is actually going to be just a little of a separation moment. So before we do anything with that, let's put in a checkbox. Which is the actual control for this first one. So we got a checkbox, we got a border around it that's all white. We don't want that. We want to make it a border, and we want to set up just only on the right side that there be a line. So now there's a little white line here. This checkbox needs to be bound to our actual enabled state, which we don't currently have. We haven't set up any values here. So if we go to this graph, we need to set up variables for this actual list item, because this list item needs a lot of different stuff. Like the first thing it needs is a be enabled for that value over there. It's also going to need a reference to the owner widget, and so this is actually going to be something slightly different. We're going to go and we're going to get that EUW batch rename that we'd made. But we're going to use a soft object reference just so that this doesn't hold a reference that might cause issues with changing the level or closing the editor back to that widget. So this here will again be an owner. And then we're also going to have what is the actor that this object references. So here we're going to have an actor, but instead of it being a soft object, well, it really could be a soft object reference. We're just going to make it a object reference. But we will, for both of these, we're going to go into this custom these values here. We're going to make sure that these are transient. So again, that we don't hold anything that needs to be saved permanently, so we don't cause any issues with if that object wants to be destroyed. We're going to do another one for when we are renaming an asset, and so instead of that, we're going to do asset data there. And we need to have the old name, which we're going to gather dynamically and store. And we need the new name, which is what it's going to be replaced with. And then the final thing is we need the index, which will be used for numbering this element. So again, this what we're creating right now will be an item in the list. It'll be what shows up on the side here. So if we like look back at the one that we already have that I've made before, this is these elements here. So again, we've got the be enabled here, we've got the old name, we've got the new name, and behind the scenes, this is storing a reference both to this whole widget, which is what the owner is, and to the actual element in the actual actor in the scene. So now that we have all of those, we can go back to their checkbox and we can set its check state to that be enabled. And this will just update automatically whenever that be enabled changes. But we also want it, when it's clicked, to have an effect. So we're going to go to on check state changed, click that here, and just drag be enabled into is checked. That hooks it all up. And that will now, whenever anyone clicks it, that will override that value. We want to make sure we set be enabled to true by default. And so now, just as a test, we can go run editor widget on here. We can see that we can click this on and off, and then it's actually being saved. Just to give you an idea of why we had to do this part, if we uncheck all that and we do it again, it doesn't stay because the value isn't getting changed every time I click. So this makes sure that when I click, it actually will change the value. So the next item that we're adding is the old name. So we're just going to do a text here. So I'll put the text in the grid panel here, and we're going to work with that for a moment. Again, the font's too big, and in this case, I don't want this to look editable, so we're going to actually lower down its opacity to 0.6. And it's in the wrong column. It should be next to this one, so we're going to set that to a column of 1. And we're going to set this to horizontally align to the right because I want it on the right side of whatever elements are here. Next, we're going to add another text. This one is just going to be a static text. So we're just going to put in here, we're going to call this old name. And actually, let's bind this right away to that old name property. This is back on the old name one, the one over here. We're going to do that there. Also, let's make it center aligned. This new one is just an arrow, so it's not important really. It's just a static piece of text. So we're going to set it to column 2, so it becomes to the right of this one here. And we're going to set its opacity even lower, just so that it's just a slight element here for visibility's sake. So we've got an old name. We got a little arrow saying, hey, that's going to become this new thing, which brings us to a text box. So we're going to add a text box here to the final column, which is 3. That's going to fill up all that space because that's how we had defined it to be with these checkboxes here. And then this one is going to be bound to the new name. So we're going to bind that to the name, but we also, just like with the checkbox, wanted to be actually able to change that name. So we're going to just have on text changed. We're going to set a command, and we're going to set new name. We're going to just do set new name, and we're going to drag text into set new name here, which will convert automatically from text into a string. And there we go. We've got that all saved up. So again, just to test that out, we're going to enter utility widget. Right now, old name isn't bound, doesn't have any values, but we can change this and it actually is working. So there we go. That is the rename here. So now we have an element. We need to fill out that element. And this is going to be the last thing that we do in this part of the video. In the next video, we're going to go to some of the more of the code behind that actually manages some of this stuff. But for here, all we got to do here is set the entry widget to that list item. It's kind of now setting that up. You can see, but it's doing something slightly different than we expected. We expected a vertical list. It's doing it horizontally. That's because the dynamic entry box lets you control that up here at the top. So we're going to do vertical. and maybe see what a few more items would look like, see if the scroll bar will show up. It will if we do that. So we're just going to go back down. Doesn't really matter. This is just for preview purposes. And here we now have more or less the layout. Maybe we do one bit of a polish here or something. We say, actually, let's get some padding here as well. Put that in the center. Make sure everything is center aligned. Go back to see what it looks like. Yep, that's gonna look pretty good. We're gonna be pleased with that. So we'll see you in the next video where we will start hooking some of this up, making it work for real.